Hi everyone, welcome back to another SimplePlanes video. In this video, I'm going to be working on the SWL-120's fuel system and part of the electrical system. So, let's get started. Now I know what most of you are thinking. Why do I have a whole video about making a fuel system when it's already done? It's these buttons here, and then the engines start if these buttons are on or off. And the reason for that is this is not actually the fuel system. This is sort of like the interface for the fuel system, or part of the interface. The actual fuel system will be entirely simulated using Funky Trees, which is the programming language of SimplePlanes. And that's what I'm going to be working on in this video, coding that. Now, the first thing I need to do before I can really start coding this is I need to figure out what causes the fuel tanks to fill up and what causes them to empty. And that component is where this graph comes in. This graph shows the fuel consumption of one engine at various throttle percentages, and also the fuel consumption of the APU. I'm just going to hide the APU for now, and I'll talk about this engine. So, first of all, you can ignore the left side. That's just how the graph I was doing works. I'm just going to use the right side for now. X, or this line, represents the throttle percentage, so of course they'll never go above 1. So anything past 1 again gets cut off. And Y represents the fuel flow in kilograms per second. I can always do some math to convert that to any other units, but it's in kilograms per second for now. So by throttle percentage, I don't mean what throttle percentage the in-game throttle slider is, because these engines are idling even when that is 0. But throttle percentage is actually, in this case, the value of N1 core. So the engine N1 core goes from 0 to 100 in terms of percentage. Then I just divide that by 100 to get 0 to 1. This is actually based off the engine N1. Now, the idle percentage of engine N1 is 0.25 or 25%. So if you debug the expression engine N1 core and you have no throttle applied, it'll idle at 25%. So this dot here is that 25% value. And any fuel below that, I just made it so it's a constant flow because you're trying to get the engine to spin up. So you're applying a constant fuel flow. I think it is, but it doesn't really matter too much for realism because it's a very short stage. But basically anything below idle, you're just applying constant fuel flow just to get the engine to spin up to idle. And also anything below 5%, actually no, I think it's 4%, there's just no fuel flow at all because the computer or something would cut off fuel. I'm partly making stuff up, partly just pretending stuff happens, so it doesn't really matter too much below that. And then as you increase the throttle, the fuel flow increases a lot. This is your average cruise setting at 80% throttle. Now I like to have the SWL-120 cruise at 70% throttle, but I just put 80% because that's what I had for the real 777. And then anything after that increases significantly. And that's why planes cruise at 80%, not 100%, because that's very inefficient. Because you're drawing like over twice the amount of fuel versus just cruising at like the same throttle percentage. And these dots do not completely line up with the line. They're just the 3 values I was able to research for engine fuel flow for the 777. And since I'm not making 777, I'm making an SWL-120, which is a fictional plane. I just got to make stuff up, so I just made it somewhat follow, but I guess it's more fuel efficient, maybe. So that's this graph. The equation for this can be seen here, which is y equals 3x to the power of 6 plus 0.3. When converted into Funky Trees, that turns into this code here, which is 3 times, and then power, because there's no like exponents in SimplePlanes, so I just have functions, so pow engine N1 core, comma 6 is the equivalent of to the power of 6. This is some extra code which is not in the other function, just to fine tune it a bit and also make it so it's not enabled below a certain fuel flow, and also when the engine fuel switch is off. That should actually be 4 because the hot start is around 4. Now the APU core is really simple, it's not as complicated as this one, partly because the APU only has 2 real settings, off and on. because the APU is at a constant speed, because it's not really an engine you can use to thrust the plane forward. It's just an auxiliary power unit, which just happens to be a jet engine. So I just made a simple linear line, which just goes from 0 to... It's really simple, it's just 0.85x. 85, not 85. Anyway, so I can just write that code here. APU fuel burn is like literally 0.85 times APU core. Done. Actually, no, I'll just change something else, because that will mean it's always drawing fuel even if you turn the APU master switch off. What switch is this? APU dial. Of course it would be APU dial. Okay, APU dial has to be greater than 0, so it could be 1 or 2. I can just put a clamp 1 around that. And that is the code for the APU fuel consumption. So these give our values in kilograms per second. So that is our fuel draw done. Now I just need to do one more bit of theory, then I can actually get to coding, which is how I'm going to really code this. So here we have all 6 of the fuel tanks of the plane. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about the fuel flow system, which is not fuel flow, the fuel crossfeed system. Now originally I was going to do a system where, say, let's just talk about these 2 tanks, tank 1 and tank 2. That is a really bad circle. Doesn't really matter. So tank 1 and tank 2. The idea of a fuel crossfeed system is, at least in my opinion, to equalize really how much the tank is filled. So there's a word for this. Anyway, so let's say tank 2 has less fuel than tank 1. Now what would happen is tank 1 would pump some more fuel into tank 2 until they both have the same amount of fuel. Same idea if tank 1 has less fuel than tank 2. Tank 2 would pump fuel into tank 1 until they are both full. Now that makes sense, except let's say I have 6. How do I clear this? Okay, got it. Say we have our 6 tanks. Now, if tank 6 has 10 units of fuel, so 10 units, and everything else has 20 units. I'm really bad at drawing. Anyway, what would happen is all 5 tanks would pump fuel into tank 6. So really, all 6 tanks are connected to all other 5 tanks. So tank 6 will be connected to all other 5, tank 5 will be connected to 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. Now that's really, really hard to code, because we need to figure out all the different possible scenarios. So instead, what I'm going to be doing, which is going to be way simpler and still allows for the idea of the crossfeed, is to have each of the tanks only consider the tank it is immediately next to. So, say tank 1 would only consider tank 2, and so it would pump fuel into tank 2 if it notices tank 1 has more fuel than tank 2, and ignore any of the other tanks. Now for tank 2, it will consider tank 1 and tank 3, it will pump fuel into tank 1, and tank 3, based on how much fuel those tanks have and how much fuel tank 2 has. This continues across all the other tanks, until tank 6 only considers tank 5. And in terms of the engines, so say we have... how do I clear this? So say I have engine 1, that's totally an engine, and engine 2. That is so bad, but engine 1 and 2, and I guess the APU, I'll just put the APU here. Tank 1 and tank 2 only pump fuel into engine 1, tank 5 and 6 only pump fuel into engine 2, and the center tanks pump fuel into both the APU and all the other engines. Now you could just, so say we have no fuel in the center tank, lots of fuel in the other wing tanks, and we want to start the APU, we could just turn on fuel crossfeed, and then eventually this fuel would flow into both the center tanks, like that. I can't delete that. But say tank 2 would start going less than tank 1, it would be filling up tank 3, and then tank 1 would be filling up tank 2, but then because tank 2 is pumping fuel to tank 3, the fuel would flow through tank 2 into tank 3. So the same thing happens, just it's just really simple code because, well, not really simple, but it's simpler because I don't have to consider all the other 5 tanks for all of the other 6 tanks. I'm not going to do the exact math, but I'm going to tell you that it's going to be way less different scenarios to code if I just do tanks next to the other tanks. So these are my tank values. So each tank has 2 pumps, and I have, how many tanks do I even have? 6 tanks. That should have been obvious. So I have 12 different pumps. Why did I do 2 pumps per tank? I guess for redundancy. Okay, so two pumps can power an engine. If one pump fails, then I guess no fuel to the engine. I don't know why I did 2 pumps, but it doesn't really matter. I've already got the engines coded based on pumps, so I'll just do the crossfeed, and I guess the engine drain as well. So I'm going to code how the tanks fill up and drain, as I'm going to use the variables called the insert with whatever tank it is, cap. So this stands for left outer tank capacity, and I actually do not need to have 3000. I can actually just get rid of all of this. So left tank dumped, or lead tank dump, is actually the there's a word for it, but it's basically the system that dumps fuel. Well, I guess that's what it's called, fuel dumping. And that is that nozzle on the wings that can dump fuel. So the center tank does not have the fuel dump feature, just the wing tanks. How fast do they actually dump? 2.5 tons per minute. What's that in kilograms per second? Approximately 42 kilograms per second in terms of how much fuel the tanks can dump. I'll just put that up here. Right, so I'm just going to forget about this for now. I'm just going to work on the crossfeed entirely. So the reason I did 3000 initially is that's what I guess the capacitor is going to be. I don't know where I got these capacities from. How much fuel can a 777 even hold? Well, it appears to be approximately 160,000 kilograms of fuel, so I guess that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so now I need to figure out the distribution in tanks. So I have 4 wing tanks and 2 center tanks. I want the center tanks to have the same capacity as all 4 wing tanks, so 80k for both center tanks, and another 80k for wing tanks. And that would be 20k per wing tank, and 40k per center tank. So that's all values. That's going to... Actually, I'm just going to make it subtract itself. So say left outer tank, I'm just going to have it be left outer tank capacity, and then I'm going to have another variable which controls setting how much fuel the tank holds. So this variable handles modifying, well, actually, I'll just have a different variable that sets the capacity. So this tank just handles crossfeed in and out and drain. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So I'll just reset all the fuel capacity variables. Alright, so I've got those done. So now I'm just going to work on the actual crossfeed system. Now for the left outer tank, I just need to worry about the left inner tank. So it's going to be... now I need to figure out how fast the fuel crossfeed system will work. Actually, I'll just make it based off how fast the fuel dump system can work. So this fuel dump speed will be if... Actually, that's actually for 2 fuel dump nozzles. So 42 would actually be 21. Which means I'll just make it be if 2 pumps are active, 1 tank can pump fuel out of itself at a rate of... I'll just make it 15. That's a little faster than the fuel dump speed, but I'll just make it 15. So the left outer tank can... I'll just do a sum. Well, I think this will work. I just need to figure out how to test this. The way I'll test this is I'll have a new file. So not this, because I don't want to break anything in this. But a new file, and then where's my other one? Then I can load that in here, create a variable. Then I can just put in, I'll just add in some more buttons. This is definitely the definition of overkill. I've got about every single button I could possibly want. And I have some dials, and even some text for whatever reason. I also did a lot more coding and refining of the fuel tank system, like the fuel transfer system. I initially had it so you had you're referring to the variable itself. They had left outer tank capacity, and then adding the sum. But the thing is, that sum has numbers in itself, so if I have some, oh no, a switch which can be 0 or 1, then that sum just keeps increasing. But the variable is already adding the value of that sum every single tick. So it's kind of like an exponential function. So like if I made the sum value, so sum just 1, then not only would that increase the sum, it would also increase the rate at which the variable added its value. I think the best way to demonstrate this is to get the original bug. So if I change this to be left outer tank capacity, and then reload the file, I'm just going to debug it so you can see it. Debug expression, left outer tank capacity. You can see it's currently 0 because by default this is 0 because there's no number that's setting it to be anything. And if I just start filling it, if I just tap the fill button, you can see it's already increasing a lot. And if I increase it even more, you can see the fuel tank instantly fills itself in like a few seconds. And this can go on and on to the point where the dials just keep going around forever. This is the same principle as having two sums. So if I have sum of a sum of 1, and if I then debug the rate of that, just pay attention to the rate of the sums and the sums. So it's increasing at a constant rate of increase, which is that initial sum. So this here is just the equivalent of sum 1. And then as the sum of 1 increases, this is the input to that initial sum. That's the same thing that's happening here with the initial code that I had before I built this test setup. That's not the only thing I changed. I also put in some basic code to handle filling and draining the tank, and the cross-feed between these two tanks. But let's just break it down. So we have 2000, which is by default how much fuel's in this tank, and then we have the sum of everything else. So that sum is everything that we're going to be modifying to 20,000. The first parameter or something we're going to have in the sum is the fill, and the sum of 1 will increase by 1 unit per second, and I want this to increase by 20 units per second, so I just times it by 20, and that's my fill button. Same for drain, but I just need to subtract it instead of adding it, so I just have subtraction. And then we have the crossfeed drain and crossfeed fill. This will change to a few more variables for the tank which has two tanks side by side, but for these two tanks it's relatively simple. Now in this one expression we have quite a few things. So first we have some code which just checks if the two pumps are on, and this crossfeed system has a different rate of drain or fill based on how many pumps are active. So if you only have, say, one pump on in a tank, then it will have half the speed compared to if it had both pumps on. Then I times this by 7.5 just to get the rate of fill or drain rate, times by fuel crossfeed active. So if the fuel master crossfeed button, which is this button here, is off, then nothing will happen again. And finally I times this by a clamper 1 of some parameters. Now this clamper 1 is basically checking, is the left outer tank fuller or has more fuel than the other tank? So if, let's say, the left tank has, I don't know, 20 units of fuel, for simplicity, and the inner tank has 15 units of fuel, 20 minus 15 will get us 5 units difference, which is greater than 0.1 here, and so this clamper 1 will return true. So yes, 5 is greater than 0.1, and so this will be 1. Now the reason I have the greater than 0.1, instead of just saying left outer tank is greater than left inner tank, is to ensure I don't simultaneously transfer fill and drain fuel at the same time. So if I just had this being 0, then just because of how sum works, it'll briefly tick over to being slightly fuller than the other tank, then it'll start draining fuel, but then it'll drain too much, and so on until we have just it keeps transferring fuel. So I just have it cut off when it reaches below this, which is precise enough. And that's our drain. Now to fill the tank for fuel crossfeed, we have basically the same code. So you have 2 pumps times 7.5 times fuel crossfeed. And then this code just checks if the left outer tank is less fuel than the inner tank. And the result of this is, let me just debug the expressions. Let me just reload the file. The result of that is a fuel crossfeed system which can automatically transfer fuel between different tanks until the 2 tanks have reached equilibrium. And as I add more tanks into this, the principle will be the same, except all the fuel is distributed equally between all 6 tanks. So all 6 tanks have the same amount. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in a 3rd tank, and then have this tank handle 2 different tanks, and then I'll show you how that code works. It's a similar idea, but just a little more code.
Approximately 10 hours later.
Well, this is a lot more code. It's kind of complicated, and it doesn't even work that well, but I'll demonstrate what I do have. So up here, you can see my 6 different tanks. I divided the 2 center tanks by 2, just so I have the same value as the other tanks, so I can see the relative fill percentage. And then down here I have all 6 tanks added together, just to give me a total of all the fuel of all the tanks. So based on how this crossfeed has worked, I can say drain the right outer tank, and you can see its capacity is going down, these all stay the same, and this has gone down as well. And if I turn on the pumps from the tank next to it, and enable crossfeed, it can transfer fuel to the outer tank. And that works. And it's the same idea for any other tank, for example the right center tank, if I were to remove fuel from it, and then enable the pumps for this tank, enable crossfeed, you can see the fuel equalizes. Now the problem is if I have, I think let's just drain this tank by a bit, and then I disable crossfeed and enable all the other pumps, enable this one as well. You'll notice the total capacity decreases even though the fuel should be just transferring around. Now it's actually increasing. There it is, it's decreasing. And I've spent a few hours trying to figure out why this happens, and my code is perfect. So I think the reason this happens is there is some sort of relationship between the different variables when they're evaluating each tick. So they evaluate 20 times per second, I think it is. It's probably something different, but anyway. And that's causing this number to slightly be off because it's not transferring fuel from, say, the right outer tank directly to the left outer tank. It's transferring fuel from the right outer tank to the right inner tank to the right center tank, and so on until we have it to the left outer tank. And that on paper works, but in practice it doesn't work that well because there's an issue. You can see we lose fuel. Now I don't know why this happens. I may have to just live with this, but I don't want to. But I also don't want to lose the crossfeed, so I think I will just have to spend more time on this or develop some solution, but I'm out of time to make this video, so I'm going to have to end this video here, and I'm going to split this video into 2 parts. So next week's video, or it may not be next week's video, but it's going to be my next video, that's going to be part 2 of this short series on making the fuel system, and in that new video I'm going to do things like adding the engine and the APU draw, and adding any other things that I need to, as well as the fuel dump. I haven't actually done fuel dump either. But at least I've got the basic idea of the transfer system working, so you could just have random tanks have different percentages or capacities, and you can see all the different levels. Mostly, it does decrease or increase sometimes, but it does mostly equalize. And that's the main point of this. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!